Abhi Ravishankar, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Thanks, Will. I'm happy to be here.
Abhi, you and three friends are building a Holdco. You're doing it to give yourselves more flexibility in your lives. You're doing it to build wealth, and you're doing it for the long term. This is a buy, build, hold strategy. And you're doing it with a partnership model that deserves our study. So let's get right into it, Abhi. Start us off with some background on you, please.
Excellent. Nice to see you, Will. So I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've been here for 14 years or so. My background has been mainly in consulting and in operations. Spent after undergrad in India, which is where I grew up. I spent 4 years in the Middle East, running operations and oil and gas rigs, offshore, onshore. Came here to the US for business school, and after business school, went into consulting with BCG and almost spent a decade there doing a wide variety of stuff, but very atypical of normal strategy or management consultants, which is, 2-3 month project. Most of my engagements were 6 to 18 month kind of engagement. So really working hand in hand. And that was what I loved about it. At the same time, there was probably like 2 or 3 times during my consulting time where I left to go do something, either on my own or join a smaller company and build something. Various reasons, something or the other kept me back. And finally, it was 2022 when I made the move, and 2021 actually, and made the move to go join a startup, which one of my friends had built and scaled for 10 years. It was a startup that does robotics for warehouses. It was great. Spent 2 years there running operations and customer success. Kind of brought a lot of things together for me. My love of like working in a smaller entrepreneurial culture, building a company, growing fast, building teams. It was just ideal. For various reasons, I ended up leaving the startup a year and a half ago. And I then kind of went back to what I had been following as this ETA movement and culture and people who've done that. I'd been following this space for 3 or 4 years, very lightly, very superficially. But I took a couple of months off after my startup gig and I said, hey, what am I going to do? Really, the thinking was, how do I bring a lot of things that give me joy, which is, building teams, building companies. I'm more of a generalist rather than a specialist, so I like playing different things. I can relate to a blue-collar employee and a C-suite executive, being able to manage all of that. I think that was then I realized, hey, you know what? I've never had a time in my life where I was gainfully unemployed. Now's the time that I can actually not go sign up for another W-2, but go do something on my own. Ended up floating this idea with a bunch of friends, and a couple of them were like, wow, this is awesome. We've thought about the same. Why don't we do it together? So my plan quickly pivoted from me
and
being...
Abhi, what was the plan as you explained to them, or what was the vision as you explained to them? Let's buy an HVAC business together, basically?
Not
pretty much.
That's how they interpreted it. Because I do remember one of my now partners telling me, the first time I heard you, I was like, what's wrong with this guy? Went to business school, was a partner at a consulting firm, and now wants to just buy a local, a plumbing business or whatever. That just sounded bizarre. But my thesis and plan there was very simple. It was like, hey, look, at this point in time, I wanted to focus time more for myself. I wanted to spend time with family. I wanted to have the flexibility and build something of my own for the long run. So trade off the year 1, year 2 cash flows for like what you build as net worth and what you build as equity for the longer haul, but do it in a more predictable space rather than the startup space, which is, being in Silicon Valley. That's what most people would gravitate towards around me. And I said, hey, why don't, I'm thinking of just buying a couple of small businesses, maybe one, maybe two. And quickly when these guys said, why don't we do it together? The plan evolved to, wait a minute, instead of me buying a 5-6 million revenue company and growing it to 10 million and holding it forever, maybe we can build a holding company of 50 million in revenue. And we all kind of learn from each other, work with each other, share learnings across our businesses, build some redundancies across businesses, and amplify the ambition that we have. And that's what we got to. And that's how we got started in May of last year.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Abhi. And we are going to dissect some of the decisions that you made there. But before we proceed with the story, Abhi, I want to ask some follow-ups. First of all, so just to be clear, it sounds like you had an entrepreneurial itch for a long time. You had been lightly following ETA. You had been sort of feeling that you wanted to do something on your own for years and years. So you are somebody who wasn't entrepreneurial for the first half of your career, but maybe it was inevitable that eventually you do something.
Yeah.
Just trying to get the personality type here.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I felt that I wasn't that big a risk taker growing up. That was not what was even okay and perceivable in middle class India. Like, hey, my family is mainly people who've sort of everybody, my uncles, aunts, cousins are all people who just went and studied, got a job, did well in life for themselves. And somebody saying, hey, I'm going to just go bet all my money on starting a business kind of sounded weird, at least where I grew up. And but what I realized, either be it in the oil services company I was in or in consulting, I had much more joy working in smaller settings where I could move things at a breakneck pace. I could break things. I could just wear those scars on my sleeves. That gave me so much joy that I realized, hey, you know what? Maybe that's what I should do. And that is probably the proverbial itch.
Mm-hmm. Great. That was great color into your personality and background, Abhi. Thank you for that. And then let's also name drop here a little bit, or the prestige on your resume. So you were at BCG. You were a partner at BCG, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So not only a partner at a consulting firm, but one of the largest, most important, most prestigious, biggest sort of blue chip consulting firms that there is. So you were not only leaving that behind certainly in terms of income, you were probably making a great salary and had even better promised income in the years ahead. But there's a lot of status that comes with that. Then you work in startup land in Silicon Valley. I know your story from the pre-call, and you were working in robotics, and it was a kind of rocket ship, high growth startup. So in startup land, there was kind of the prestige of working in for a high growth startup in robotics, sexy area. So what about, you haven't talked at all about the status that you were leaving behind. You've kind of hinted at it where where your friends were like, what are you talking about? But speak to that directly, please.
Yeah. That was a big mindset shift, Will. And I felt it happening probably some midway during my startup tenure over there. I know in a lot of ways we're all sort of pre-wired to that of what society values and marks as high status, and admittedly so. I probably was the same. I think what really shifted things for me was the fact that when I left consulting to go join the startup, it immediately changed the perception in my head that, okay, I've already left consulting, so that's already in the rear view mirror. Now, on my own, I'm on my own journey, And if my journey gives me joy, gives me fulfillment, that's the highest status I can aspire to. And in my head, that made me, well, wow, that's the highest status that I can ever be. So it's already gone. It's not like I've burned the boats. I can always go back to consulting if I want to. But in this time now, it's on my own terms and my own journey. And I think that was one big shift, probably a year into startup world, where I felt I started getting comfortable with the leader I am, with what I'm doing. And I felt like I've achieved what I wanted to in my own head. And I think after I left the startup and in that 2 months of soul searching, sabbatical, however you want to put it, I think I really got to look, if I achieve a few things in my life, which is, hey, my daughter is 5 years old. I get to spend more time with her now at this age. I get to spend more time on myself and the flexibility of what I want to do and the things I want to pursue. That's the happiest life I can build for myself. And that to me superseded a lot of status. All that said, it is still extremely difficult when you talk to people and you're telling them this story, and people who are not used to the SMB world and the ETA world, and you kind of talk about it, and it comes up. I was in a mixer at a BCG alumni event a couple of weeks ago, and people are like, "What? You're buying and running pool businesses?" We'll come back to that later, but that was how they thought about it too. But I felt pretty happy where I was coming from, where it is. And they're smart people. They kind of get it. They're like, hey, okay, now they ask a few questions and they get the vision and then they get it. But I think once you make that mental shift yourself, it becomes way easier.
And another point on your pivot here into doing this that you just hit on that I wanted to make sure that we did was the life flexibility. Yeah. So that startup experience that was between BCG and doing this, you worked very hard, crazy startup hours, and it took a bit of a toll, right? And so you were coming in the wake of that. That was something you were trying to solve for. Say more.
Yeah, absolutely. Consulting is generally a pretty busy kind of a job. It is a 60 plus hour kind of a per week kind of a job. But I think being a startup executive of a fast growing company, not just the expectation, but just the drive that you yourself have to build something, to conquer challenges is so high that it takes a tremendous amount of time, energy that goes into it. I was also, I ended up traveling a lot more than what I had sort of bargained for. I thought, hey, consulting to coming and working for a company, I would travel lesser. It's probably the case in the beginning, and then it started kind of going up, much to the case of I was traveling 3 or 4 times a month. And, being up late, it's a global company. So I'm at calls at all times during the night and day. And that took a toll on my personal life and being able to do what I want, give the time that my family needs and what I want to spend time with my family. And that was the realization I came to, is look, I love high growth, but if these are the sacrifices that are required for, to be in a high growth environment, maybe this is not the right life stage for me. Maybe, when my daughter is a teenager and she's like, Dad, just leave me alone. I want to be with my friends. Maybe that's the time I can kind of say, okay, let's go get on another rocket ship at that point of time. But at this time, I want to be present and available. And that's the decision I had to make.
Great. And then one other thing that really caught my attention in our pre-call was the quality of the work that drew you to entrepreneurship through acquisition, wanting to work in tangible services. I guess services by their definition, is not tangible, but kind of in the real world with real world outcome, as opposed to knowledge work. Say more about that one, please, because that is not one I've heard articulated very often.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of a reflection of myself and my experience. All the industries that I've worked on are more, atoms than bits and bytes. So, energy, power, transportation, manufacturing. These are the kind of industries I've spent more time in. I've spent way more time in like factories and refineries and warehouses than I have in a data center or whatnot, right? So to me, I wanted to build on that. Like, hey, I have an edge here. I can connect to people who can work there. I can understand. I can speak that language. At the same time, I can sit next to a CEO and kind of talk strategy. So if I want to be able to build both of these, I wanted to kind of build a company which is more catered towards, hey, here's a very tangible product or service. When you're in consulting as a partner, more or so, you're sort of an entrepreneur. You still have a P&L. You're building your team. You have to go get your clients. But what you're really selling is knowledge work. You're selling impact of a transformation that you would do. You're selling the impact of a strategy that you would kind of come up with and help somebody else execute. And I'd done that for a while, and I felt like the thing that gave me more joy, though, was, waking up to this warehouse, 45 minutes outside of LA, this giant warehouse with, it used to be so loud, and now there are 1,000 robots just moving everything, and it's so silent, and they're just moving things around. And I'm like, you know what? We've built something here as a team, as a company, and that gave me so much more joy than trying to go sell a transformation. And that's when I realized, you know what? This is what I want to do. This is what I'm decently good at, and I want to do. So why not try to do that?
Fantastic, Abhi. And I haven't heard you yet mention any sales experience. And given that you convinced 3 skeptical friends, not only that this was a great path for you, but that maybe I assume you influenced them into all doing this together. I know that wasn't your initial goal, I don't think, to do a 4-way Holdco. But obviously, they not only were convinced that it was a good path for you, but for them to participate as well. Was it just the brilliance of the vision, or do you have any sales experience?
I mean, as a partner, you're essentially a salesperson. That's probably like 80% of your hat is actually sales, and then you're kind of doing it in a very consultative manner. So I feel like the last 5 years of BCG was, I was doing sales, but I was just doing it in a very consultative, partnership-oriented model rather than here's a widget, let me sell you this widget. And I think that was probably where I, cut my teeth. And even in the startup line, like, I was doing ops and customer success. So a large part of it was like, hey, customers already chosen to go with us. Now they need to expand. And I was the one working with, our clients in expanding our footprint within them. So that was, again, probably a 50% of a sales role in itself. And I enjoy sales, but I am probably not a very good sell a widget kind of guy, but I can talk to people and in a very partnership oriented manner, kind of get a sale out there. So, but when it comes to purely the Holdco part, we can get into a bit of it, but 2 out of the 3 other partners of mine, we went to business school 14, 13 years ago. And we met then, and we used to, at least one of them used to joke around that, he wants to just buy a series of gas stations and run them. And that was his idea. So in a way, we were all pre-wired to it, where we had talked about it half jokingly or whatever. That was already talked about in some setting. So all we needed was a catalyst for one of us not to be at a W-2 and kind of say, hey, you know what? I'm making the jump. And I ended up being the catalyst. That's all.
Okay, great. Well, now let's return to the story. Perfect segue. Let's hear more details around what the vision became.
Yeah. So the vision, as it was sketched out in a Starbucks napkin, quite literally, was okay. Here's four of us. We are going to build a holding company to buy and grow small businesses. Our secret would be operating, not investing. We are okay as investors, but we are probably better than the average operator. And we will not pursue this like a private equity fund or so, where we are really looking to kind of go all in and exit in 3 to 5 years, but we will look at it as a longer term holding company. And why? Because we valued cash flow. We valued the ability for all of us to leave our W-2s, come in, afford a Bay Area lifestyle with kids and support that. We would want to build enduring companies that have good cash flow. That said, we never kind of like made it like, hey, we are all going to retire as 65-year-olds with these 40-year-old companies. No, that was never the case. We was more like, look, we are not in the 5-year mode. We are not in the 50-year hold mode, somewhere in between. But we can be flexible depending on each company and the market and the industry and what happens. We did also have another, principle of like, let's not take investor money upfront. Let's try to structure it in a way wherein we are doing what we can with our capital. And all of us have spent, 15 plus years in corporate, and we had some savings, and we were willing to allocate some part of that and also reinvest some of the cash flow from the businesses that we would buy into these businesses for future acquisitions. So, and there was a reason why we were not too keen on investor capital. I can get into that. But that was sort of the founding principles of this holding company. As to how we operationalize it, we said, it's kind of difficult for all four of us, different stages in life, to just quit our jobs on day one and just kind of jump into this. And anyway, I was out of a job and I was looking to go do something. So we said, hey, you know what? Let's buy a company for Abhi. We go run it, and over time, over the next 2 to 3 years, 2 to 4 years, each one of them leaves their W-2 and then kind of comes in. Either the companies that I've acquired have grown so much that we need a couple of operators, or we buy a separate business for them. So if you fast forward that to 5 years, we've got all four of us in it full time, all four of us at least running or operating a business, because remember, that was the secret sauce that we kind of thought we could bring, is we are better than average operators. And we can share resources. We can kind of have a lot of things I could help with. We could build some small, hey, this is the same marketing engine that we can kind of use for two or four of these businesses. And that was how we thought we are going to operationalize it. We weren't completely against investor capital, but we were like, let's go as far as we can with debt and some creative ways of financing it. And at some point of time, if we really have to bring in external capital, that's fine. We can kind of do that. To kick this all off, let's go find a company for Abhi to run. And
Abhi, you didn't want investors, just for the obvious, retain as much flexibility and control as possible reason. I mean, you already are a foursome, so you've kind of got
Correct.
a built-in panel of people
Correct.
that you're going to have a group decision making anyway.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, that's great, Abhi. And so just to be clear, so it's a very sequential model here. Abhi goes first because Abhi was the catalyst. Abhi is already in between jobs, so you're going to go find a business first and be the operator. And then And then sequentially, your three partners will follow suit over the course of, call it, 5 years. But just trying to understand the money piece. So you guys have savings, you can buy the businesses with your own capital. But I heard you mention not needing to take much out of them, reinvesting a lot of the cash flows of the businesses back into them. What was the plan to actually be able to live off of them and
Sure.
replace the salaries that you were all leaving? When do you get to do that? Do you, as operator, presumably you're gonna earn a salary from the business that you are kind of quote unquote your business? But is it going to be a salary commensurate with the job you left behind? What does all that look like?
Yeah. One of the good parts about doing this with people who I knew were friends and people I've worked with and trusted is, we've gone to battles in different settings together. Like one of them worked with me, so we knew each other deep enough to have some deep conversations early on, which may be difficult if you just found a partner at a networking event and you start to build a company. Because one of the conversations I remember having was, let's have a very, very real conversation about what's the minimum amount of money you want to make where you kind of keep your lifestyle as it is, but you're not just earning a bunch of other money that just goes and you would invest somewhere. Like this is, let's call it in Bay Area, you want to earn $250K. Would that be good for your lifestyle and for your family and what you have going on? Do you need 250? You need 200, 300? And it could be different for each one of us. We literally wrote that on a whiteboard. And after discussing with our spouses and whatnot, and put that money out there and said, hey, you know what? This is the minimum amount we need to make. And if we can make more than that, all of that goes reinvested back into the business, because what we are building is we are building a company that is way more valuable 10 years from now than what it is today. And that's the real worth of what we are trying to build. And we are willing to make the sacrifice of like, okay, I've got a big salary. I'm just using, half of it. The other half is going into index funds and whatnot. Instead of doing that, here's this smaller salary that I'm drawing. And the rest of it, I'm building equity in this company that's going to be very valuable. We did say, as and when people come in full time, we are going to, have them salaries. Salaries, of course, will no way be commensurate to what any one of us is making and will be making. But that's the deep, honest conversation we were willing and able to have within 2-3 months of us all getting together to start this. And I think that set a very strong foundation to where we are now.
But this number that you all wrote on the whiteboard, so did you come to the same, you all had to agree on the one number? Let's say it was 300,000.
No, it was 4 different numbers for each one of us, right? And that was totally fine. We said, hey, we'll figure that out if we need to make, but they were all pretty close. They were all not too far off because, all of us are married, have 1 or 2 kids, all kids around the same age. And we all live within 15-20 minutes of each other. So it's kind of like, there's not a lot of change in what that is going to be. And none of us drive Lamborghinis or whatever. So we are normal people where it was pretty in a tight band, so to speak.
And so the idea was, so everybody had their number within 250 to 350,000. And beyond, and so that was kind of, you were pre-agreeing to what each person's salary would be when they, and everything else beyond that would go back into the business rather than it going into their pockets to be invested in their side real estate or an index fund or what have you. You're all agreeing that excess capital out of this project goes back into the project.
Yes.
Okay. And sorry, when does everybody get that number they wrote on the board? When they, because you, Abhi's salary now is not going to be that number. You're going to be paid market rate for salary. Right. So what's the delta between the salary you earn as operator and that final number?
Great question. And We all have different places where we all at different places where some of our spouses work, some of them don't work, and we want to balance that as well. For me, and we said, hey, look, let's be flexible in how we kind of like get to this point. We're not going to build a big company if we all don't come in full time. This is not a hobby. We can't do this with, just Abhi doing it and the others sort of like sitting on the wings. And we're not going to build that 50 million revenue company that we kind of dreamt about. So when one of us is willing to come in, let's have that conversation. We need to make adjustments on distributions, on equity. Let's have that conversation. Let's make it fair. We believed enough in our shared values that we felt comfortable that we can have that conversation. For me personally, I wanted to get to that number within 2 years of when I started. I'm like, look, here's my number. And if I need to get to that number, I want to start getting towards it. And the way you get towards it is, one, you need to run the business well. It has to grow well. And either you're growing it organically or inorganically, it doesn't matter, but that's what you need to do. And I was prepared to do it. And I felt I was confident of saying, hey, you know what? I get started on this. In a couple of years, we would have built a company which can afford that for me. Now, the best case would have been it can afford it for one more person, so they also can come in and we can kind of like start building it together, but maybe not. And if that's the case, let's buy another company for them.
Okay. So the brunt, the majority of those numbers that each of you put on the wall that you needed to make are going to come as operator salaries for the businesses that you each of you, you're kind of little fiefs.
Yep.
Okay, great. And I also heard you mention the number 50 million. I know it was kind of a throwaway, but is that in fact the number that you guys would like to collectively get to? I mean, obviously there's no, let's not put arbitrary ceilings anywhere. Why not 100 million? But is that kind of like, if this vision will have been successful if you get to 50 million cumulatively?
I think I think the first time we said it was definitely a throwaway number, but we've now said it a few times enough where we do aspire to it. And we say, hey, you know what, that is a mark where we would feel we've built something substantive.
Okay. Fascinating, Abhi. The other thing that I want to draw out of you is how doing this with partners, your kind of pinch hitter model. So if you're the principal in the first business you acquire, but then go to India for a wedding for 3 weeks, one of your 3 partners is kind of the understudy of you as CEO of that business and can make sure the wheels don't fall off while you're gone. Maybe I just said everything there is to say, but please say more.
You did say it very well. That's precisely, we call it the primary and secondary partner model. So we said, hey, every business we buy, there's going to be a primary operator and a secondary operator. It's just better risk management, and it's better for always a CEO to have somebody who understands the business well enough to give you another perspective. It's very difficult for me as the operator of business number one to kind of keep everybody in the loop for everything that we are kind of doing. But one more person, far easier. So we kind of started this model very early on, and it has worked tremendously well for us. And I think that's one of the, in our pre-call, we kind of talking about it, the pros and cons of like, hey, obviously in a partnership model, you give up some upside to what else could have been yours. But really, I feel on the flip side, what I've gained from it is this ability to have the flexibility that I would want. And that was the core why I was doing it. And I was never going to forget that part. And once we designed this model, so we now have a guy who's a secondary partner, kind of is involved with most major decisions. All the employees know him. Unlike employees don't need to know that, hey, here's this group of 4 people who are owning us. They just see me every day, and they see Raj on a very recurring basis and know him very well. And he runs some work streams as well with the company. But when I'm gone, which I was this year for my brother's wedding in India for 3 weeks, Raj would just go in to the shop every couple of days, check in on our team and, make any decisions that need to. And, he was completely, and I barely had to kind of run the model, which, talking to other searchers and search CEOs, it's such a big mental burden of like, hey, I'm going to travel to, somewhere else. And for 3 weeks, it's a huge hassle. And I think we've built this system which works well. And now he's had 18 months of a shadow CEO role where he's much more prepared to be a better CEO in the business we're going to buy for him. So that's the advantage as well.
Yeah. And by the way, did Raj, you said he had to make some decisions. Did he have to make any big decisions? Did he have to put out any fires? Was he really tested? Or was he just FaceTime, kind of having FaceTime there with the employees?
Thankfully, there weren't any big issues during those 3 weeks. But there were quite a few small decisions that he had to make. And just the FaceTime matters a lot. In fact, even more than the decisions, if it was a big decision, he would have called me and we would have talked through it. And he would have, I'm very confident he would have done the right thing. But I think the biggest value is the team feeling. The owner is not just sitting in Hawaii and, going and doing nothing. Like the owner is still present. One of the owners is still present. They care about the business. They care about the problems. And just having that creates a big mental shift in how they work. And it was a pretty busy season for us. It's a pool service business. It was summer, so it's kind of busy. And they were able to work through a lot of that and ask Raj for some small decisions. But one of the good things it also gave, and I didn't share this the last time we spoke, was at the end of those 3 weeks, Raj came up to me and said, hey, Abhi, I've noticed these 3 sort of meta problems that the company is kind of thinking. I feel that we are dropping the ball in this process more often than not. Things that I probably knew, but I hadn't really kind of surfaced and articulated in the way he would have. And that immediately gave a rallying cry when I came back saying, okay, you're actually spot on. Now that you say it, it fits everything that I've been observing. Let's go solve that problem. And we solved it in like the next 4 weeks. So that's the cool part about it.
I want to dissect the numbers a little bit of how the equity is all split in just a second. But before we get to that, as this sequence unfolds, Abhi goes first, then number 2, 3, and 4. Did you have any guardrails or teeth in the agreement? What if one of you just doesn't get around to it, or some other career opportunity comes along, they're offered some amazing role that they just can't say no to, and therefore can't participate as in terms of searching for, buying, and operating a small business? Like what were your, there's this length of time for this all to come to fruition, and there's any sort of variable could not go the way you expect. How did you account for that?
Yeah. Without getting into a lot of legalese and specifics, the short answer is yes. We did talk about it. We talked about quite a few sort of morbid scenarios too, right? What happens if, one of us is gone, and, what happens if one of us needs to move to another country?
Right.
All sorts of scenarios. And look, to be honest, does the operating agreement cover every one of those things? No. Did we have the belief that we can create a fair outcome for most of them when that would happen? Yes. Did we consider the big scenarios and write them in? Yes. We also did consider, hey, we at the same time we wrote the number for each of us on that whiteboard. We also wrote what's the drop dead date by when you will be full time, and that's all on a whiteboard. And we kind of like we go back to it every 6 months or so and kind of talk about it and say, hey, are we on track to doing this? How do we feel about it and whatnot? And so far, everything is running as we intended it to and what people signed up for.
Great, Abhi. Okay, now let's get to the numbers. We haven't even gotten to the business that you bought, which is where we'll spend the second half of our conversation.
Yeah.
But just before we get there, let's just get to now the equity structure of this and how the principal of each business that he was in charge of acquiring, he owns more of, because just to contextualize that, just remember, audience, the business that we're going to hear about Abhi buying and doing well with, why did he need the other three guys since they're all working W-2? He could have just gone out and done this himself, but he's basically, you got money to help you buy that, but you've also got a fourth of it rather than 100% of it. You shared one answer, which is that this understudy model where Raj can come in while you're in India is amazing, and not only to kind of keep things, keep the wheels on while you're gone, but actually bring fresh eyes to the business and point out areas of improvement and actually be adding value. Very, very powerful, and it really gets to the core of why you're doing this, which is the flexibility that you want in your life. Very powerful in its own right. But now tie in the numbers and how the equity is actually divided.
I'll share some rough numbers, right? I think roughly we are equal partners at the holding company level. So you have a holding company. For simplicity, let's just call it 25, 25, 25, 25. So you've got 4 partners. We didn't want it to be known as like, hey, if we buy operating company 1, it's like Abhi's business. No, not really. It's sort of like, hey, it's the holding company's business. Abhi's operating it for now. Maybe we buy a second business and I'm a better operator for the second one. So I go there and Raj comes in here. Any of that could happen. But that was the primary model. And we said at an operating company level, we think about the holding company putting up 100% of the capital. So let's say we're buying an operating company for $10 million. Each one of us is responsible for kind of like funding that as part of the Holdco. But at each operating company level, depending upon a bunch of different things, depending upon how we are financing it, how big of an operational role would be needed for someone to kind of like run this, what's the intensity, what's required, and what is their personal life requirements, etc. We would allocate a sweat equity pool, which we grant to the operator who's kind of coming in to run it on a day-to-day basis. And that sweat equity pool just dilutes the Holdco. So to use a very simple example, we kind of built one for our operating company 1, which was like, there's a 20% equity pool. Let's say that 20% goes to me because I'm the first operator. And then the remaining 80% is owned by the Holdco. So 1/4 of each one of that is owned by each one. So now my 3 partners own 20, 20, 20. I own 20 through the Holdco and 20 through the sweat equity pool. So I own 40, just to use round numbers. I think that's how we got to this plan. And we've kind of done that twice now in 2 different settings. And the model is largely the same. There might be some adjustments we are making due to various things, who's PGing alone, because we don't need to all 4 of us PG. We are kind of saving our dry powder for what we were going to end up building. So there are lots of considerations, that minor adjustments, but those adjustments are like sitting down and talking for a few hours. You can kind of work out those things. But the main Holdco at the operating agreement level, these principles are enshrined. So whenever we go do a new one, it's just minor adjustments based off of this model.
And why do this model? What effect has it had on you, Abhi, as the first acquisition being your acquisition, that you own 40%, and at the Holdco level there's some dilution? Is that just kind of just incentivizes you further, presumably?
Correct, exactly, right. And we wanted to build one where, hey, the first time I was building it, I'm building it as an investor, as a Holdco investor. I'm wearing that cap and kind of saying, hey, does this work for me? But at the same time, I'm looking at the operator's hat, and is this lucrative enough for me? If I'm going to grow this, is this going to work? And I think we try to delicately manage that balance, and it's kind of worked out, because now, let's say you buy and we have bought our second operating company. Using the similar example, I own 20% of that. I'm not spending a lot of time on it. I'm spending a lot more time on this. If I had bought operating company one as a solo searcher, and I own maybe 80 and some investors own 20 or so, I can get that by just all my partners buying companies of their own. Mm-hmm. And when you get to that model, I kind of come whole to owning 80% of a single company. Mm-hmm. But now I'm diversified. Now I have increased the odds of success of 3 or 4 businesses. I have maintained flexibility, and I'm not on this journey alone. So I bank a few more wins along the way. It may not look rosy and appetizing in year 1, but in year 4, it is gonna balance out.
Let me just repeat that, because that was just a really profound distillation of the whole model. So let's assume nobody has investors. So your model with no investors versus a self-funded searcher who's in the fortunate position of not needing investors either, and they own 100%. So the typical SBA self-funded searcher owns 100% of their business. Sounds great. Is great, versus your model, the Abhi model, where you own 40% of one business plus 20% of another plus 20% of another plus 20% of another. So in total, we get to 100%, but it's diversified across 4 businesses. You're a little more concentrated in the business that you're operating yourself. And so the numbers individually coming out of the dividends or the EBITDA that you're participating in each of those businesses may be smaller, but in aggregate, and certainly in the long term, after you all have reinvested enough that you're starting to really enjoy dividends, you feel will be better. It's obviously better diversified. So as an investment, it's stronger, at least in theory. And you've bought yourself the benefit of, you're doing this as a team. So you're not just a lone wolf out there figuring everything out on your own and likely to maybe make bad decisions, where if you had a partner or partners, they could have steered you in a better direction.
Yep, that's the vision.
That's great. It's great. It's pretty convincing here, Abhi. The only trick is, for people listening, they got to go find 3 people they really, really trust and have known for 15 years since business school to do it with. Okay, I think we've covered the model. If not, we'll return to it where we've left gaps. Let's turn now for the remainder to the first business you bought, Abhi's business. What were your criteria, please?
Criteria was it's got to be local, because I didn't want to get on a plane or drive 3 hours every day. It had to be ideally in a blue collarish or a blue/white collarish industry. We wanted the first one. We just wanted to bank a win. We didn't want a hairy deal. We didn't want to bite off more than what we could chew. So we wanted a business which was, call it the usual search criteria of like 700, 750K SDE to a couple of million in EBITDA SDE, right? Like that was sort of the range we were kind of looking at. Ideally, we would have wanted something that had a recurring component, the usual, as usual, but a reoccurring would have been great. So those were the usual ones, but indexed very heavily on the local part. So industry agnostic, but local, right? Doesn't matter what it is in. If it's painting, that's fine. If it's commercial cleaning, that's fine. If it's whatever, that was good. And that was the criteria. And literally one day I just started going on Biz Buy Sell, putting together, I didn't do the fancy, hey, let's put a CRM together. Let's do proprietary outreach. None of that. It was as good as like, hey, open up a spreadsheet, put some deals on there, kind of create your own CRM, so to speak. Just look at Biz Buy Sell and a few other listing sites. Just talk to brokers. And probably in a span of 6 weeks, looked at 30, 40 different opportunities, try to dial down on 10 to 12 sectors. My way of approaching it is like, hey, go very, very deep on one sector for a couple of days and see and get to if it's a no. It's very hard to get to whether it's the perfect company in the perfect industry in 2 days, but it's fairly easy to say no. And
it's one of these where speed to know. You're trying to get to know as quickly.
Exactly. And that's what we were
just Abhi, as a former consultant, give us a quick 5 bullet points on how you teach yourself an industry in 2 days. What did you do? YouTube University sort of thing?
A bunch of that. I like, as a consultant, I just like talking to people who've done it. Okay. So I would just cold email people, cold LinkedIn people who are in that space, Twitter, somebody who's and try to just get on a call. It's the single best way. And
you would say, I'm looking at buying a business in this industry. Will you give me 15 minutes?
Yep. Mm-hmm. And, I even looked at franchises, and I would call up other franchisees in that space and just say, I'm looking into it very early in the space, because they will probably try to check, hey, is this person legit? Thankfully, with a decent LinkedIn profile and, they would look me up and go, okay, I can talk to this person.
Yeah.
And he's just not a scammer. So that's predominantly one. Number two, and the best way I feel is to build a model. I would just build a rough model of that industry, try to kind of because when you're doing that, you start thinking about what drives behavior, what drives, revenue, what drives cost. And you start really asking yourself the question of what's the true value driver in this industry and in this sector. And the third is literally mapping that against.
And by building a model, you mean a model of a single company in the industry, I assume.
Yeah. Of a target
like a
SIM,
single P&L sort of.
Yeah, if I've already gotten the SIM of a company, and that's why I'm looking at that sector. And that's how I, by the way, got into sectors. It's not like I was okay, let me go look at in-home senior care services. That's the thing I just happened to find an in-home senior care Biz Buy Sell listing, reached out to the broker, got the SIM, talked to the seller, and now I want to dig more into this industry. So then I would pro forma build out a model on that. I would call a few people who've been in that space. And thirdly, just run it against a bunch of checklists of, am I the right operator for this? Does this amplify my strengths? Does it shine a glaring light on my weaknesses? And is this something that I can do? And many of them, FedEx routes are a great example, right? It's such a liquid market. I was like, and I spoke to people who've built good 1.5, 2 million EBITDA businesses just doing that, and probably spend less than 10 hours a week running it. And I was like, wow, that is so cool. How did he do that? And I've, talked to a bunch of them. But then I realized it doesn't check one thing in my box, which is you're going to get calls on the weekends. You're going to get calls on weird times of the day. I was like, if I wanted to do that, I would have probably, I would have liked to get a call about a robot going bust in a warehouse in South Korea rather than, doing this. I didn't want, that didn't pass my sniff test of what I wanted to do. So, that's when you kind of look into it and you go okay, this is good, but it doesn't match these. So those were the 3 primary things I did, which was calls, a model, and then my checklist of whether I'm the right operator.
Funny about the FedEx routes. You do see them all over Biz Buy Sell, and there's a searcher I know who bought FedEx routes and then also exited them. I've been twisting his arm to come on, haven't quite convinced him. But it's surprising. I've been unable to get anybody on here who's done FedEx routes. I think they're scared of FedEx itself. But it is such a common. You see it all over Biz Buy Sell. Those route packages. Yeah. Great. Okay. And so what did you find? What was the one that you went with? Please tell us about it.
And talking of listings that are all over BizBuySell, the other
Hmm.
thing that you also see is pool routes. A lot of them. And I didn't,
Mhm.
that was my first introduction to a pool route. But eventually, the sim that really got me hooked was a company which was 15 minutes from where I live, a swimming pool service company, which was much bigger than all the pool routes that you see on BizBuySell, which are roughly listed at like $40,000 to $100,000 of enterprise value, where you're just buying a customer list. That's it. Whereas this was a company where it's close to about 3 million revenue, had 17 employees, had been in business for 40 years, had many long tenured employees, and the owner was wanting to retire and sell. And I remember sending this in the WhatsApp group of my partners saying, "Hey, this kind of looks good. Does any of you know anything about it?" And Raj is the only guy who had a swimming pool amongst the four of us. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I think I know." And then, went to Raj's house and got the 1 hour introduction to swimming pool equipment and what it kind of means. And we started thinking about how
And did he have a pool guy, or did he
he
service
did
his
have a
own
pool guy. Yeah. Now he doesn't.
Everybody who has a pool
But-
has a pool guy, pretty much. No, he doesn't, right?
No. Yes. I mean, especially in areas like the Bay Area where people have money and or are a busy job,
Yeah.
you get a pool guy, and that makes it
Yeah.
easier. And it's just less headache, and you can kind of enjoy the pool. It's not a very high expense, and I think that's the business we found. Within 6 weeks, we had closed on the deal.
And Abhi, so it was a pool route business, just a big, established 40-year-old, long tenured employee one.
Yeah.
So it was that
think of
business. It
as
just was a standout.
14 routes combined. And
Mhm.
along with that, they had 2 or 3 specialist repair technicians who are sort of pseudo plumbers / electricians who can kind of, they're not probably as skilled as that, but very close to it. But they're some of the hardest people to kind of like get and retain and do that. And then you've got a bunch of regular pool guys as part of the team.
Mhm.
They even had a service manager. They had a retail location. So it was a very dialed in operation of how it was supposed to be. And they'd done it for a long enough time that they'd ironed out a lot of these kinks. So it was an amalgamation of these.
And wait, what does the retail serve? Who's the customer there? Other pool companies? Or
usually
the home consumer?
DIY customers
DIY.
who want to take care of their own pool and just want some supplies. And mostly
And does that actually generate any revenue? Are there enough DIY pool people who go and get their own chemicals?
The short answer is no. And we just shut down the retail store this month.
Okay.
I was made to believe that it is an excellent source of lead gen. But it absolutely is not.
Yeah. I mean, you're interacting with the very people who have disqualified themselves by virtue of the fact that they're DIY.
Right.
Great. So that's a sizable business. So did you say? I don't think you said what the SDE was. So 3 million in revenue. What was it earning?
Roughly about 20%, a little over 20%. So in the 600 to 700 kind of range was where it was.
Great. And can you share with us the terms of the deal?
Yeah. So the reason why we ended up, I kind of gave the ending first, which was we closed it in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And the reason was this business had been put up for sale a couple of times and didn't go through because of things beyond some personal situations emerged, and the potential buyers had backed off and had been on the market for 6 months. The seller was really itching to sell it and retire and spend time with his grandkids. And we were in the final round of it. We were trying to compete with another party who was kind of going with an SBA route, and the seller was really unhappy with that. He's like, "Man, that's going to be another quote unquote colonoscopy of having to go through with the SBA bank." Having already done that twice, he was very reluctant to. So the broker, who initially was very reticent about me being a legitimate buyer, he's like, "Why are you, some guy who's been a consultant, trying to buy a pool company? This doesn't sound real." After I built some trust with him, he kind of came up with this option of like, "Look, because we wanted to go the SBA route. That was our default route." And he was like, "Look, if you go to the SBA route, you're just going to shoot out between these two. He'll pick one of you two. But if you really, really want this business, like you're telling me, then there's another way. I can convince him to take a much larger seller note than what it is. And you guys just go, instead of putting 10% up, maybe you put a quarter or a third up. And would that work?" And I was like, you get the seller to agree to 3/4, and yeah, you got a deal. We can kind of figure out how we get 25% of that capital or so. So we ended up.
And here's another example, Abhi, of how doing a 4-way Holdco was beneficial, because that additional 15 points you needed to come up with was split 4 ways. So you actually each only needed to come up with whatever 3 and 3.75 or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Exactly. So that was how we kind of structured it. It was roughly in that range, a pretty large seller note. We ended up putting our capital up front. We did discuss it of like, hey, maybe we are losing some dry powder, but at the end of the day, it's about getting into the game first, rather than sitting on the sidelines trying to like just look for that perfect deal, which is never going to come. There was a lot of hair on this deal in different ways, but that was like in my third point on the checklist of, am I a good operator? I was like, hey, you know what? I can overcome some of this hair, so I'm okay with it. So we ended up putting a little more dry powder and ended up buying this company. Typically, in this space, and generally things trade at the 3 to 4x. We kind of went slightly on the higher side of that range so that we can get the deal done. And that's how we ended up closing it with no SBA, just pure seller note, amortized over a long time, and self capital.
So higher end of 3 to 4x, so toward 4x on a 600 to 700 EBITDA business. So somewhere in the 2 to 2.5 range, $2.5 million purchase price range. And didn't you also tell me that the interest rate on the seller note was great?
Yeah. We were able to get that down to 5-6% range. That's how we've kind of like talked about it. I mean, in a lot of ways, my communication to sellers is, look, in this case, the seller had a reason why he was willing to go up, because he didn't want to go through the same thing again and something else breaks 4 months down the lane, and now he's sitting with this business he's been trying to sell for a year. So I could see that, but at the same time, I knew he was going to retire, and there are a lot of good beneficial tax reasons. Consult your CPA for that, but there are reasons why that's actually good for him in terms of assured income. And all he wanted to know was like, hey, are we real people? Are we bankable people? And he's been in this area. He's born and brought up in Palo Alto and has lived here this whole age. We talked to him about our families, and he was able to kind of see that we are legitimate people, and he was willing to bank on us. And he's been, just a small 15-second digression. He's been an amazing, guy. Even now, 18 months in, he sends us, gifts now and then. He writes sweet cards now and then, and kind of tells us how happy he is. And every time I call him for something, he's like, "Have you already taken over the world?" Is how he picks up his phone. He's such a sweet guy. So it's been great.
That's amazing. It's amazing. Well, that's great to have such a great relationship with him. And I'll say that the fact, you had to make this decision to use some of your dry powder that you were waiting to use for future deals, but really to go from 10% down that you were expecting and going the SBA route to 25% down, and having him to then get the remaining 75% fully seller financed. It's a pretty low price to pay, I'd say. That's a lot of seller financing.
Yeah. And I think, having now talked to many searchers who've done SBA, and we have our second portfolio company, which is an SBA loan, there are days when I do have I wish it was an SBA deal, because it's like, hey, it's because you don't get them amortized for 10 years. You might get if you're lucky, 7 years, 8 years. I think this one's like roughly like 7 years. And yes, you are paying, and just that shorter amortization kind of puts us much, much, much higher impact on your cash flow. So we were kind of okay with that, because we did the math and we felt like, look, even if we are losing 2-3 years in additional amortization, we get a lower interest rate, which is beneficial.
Right.
But the interest rate, when you model it out, is a much smaller needle mover than length of the note itself. So
good to know. I didn't realize that.
2 more years is worth more than 3 or 4 interest, 3 or 4 points on an interest rate. So I think we always push for, like, I'm happy to write a seller note for 7% if I can get 10 years. I'm very happy to do that. So I think that's the kind of model. And typically in the pool industry, because the industry is so liquid in terms of selling routes and whatnot, it's very fragmented, very liquid. There are some rules of how the industry is evolved. They're not used to seller notes. So this one, I actually give kudos to the broker who worked with us, because he was able to kind of say, hey, look, if you really want this is how you kind of structure it. And I think we've kind of had success with a couple other subsequent add-on acquisitions as well, by really articulating the value of how this is useful for the seller in a lot of different ways, especially when they're retiring and they want fixed income for the next few years, and they're able to get that at a pretty high confidence rate. So it's worked out for us. Would I do it anywhere else? No, I would still do what I did now. But there are days when I'm like, I wish I had a 10-year amortization.
Yeah, really, really good to know that when you model a loan, that the longer amortization can be worth whatever, a few points of interest rate. I wouldn't have guessed that. But great also to be reminded that there is an argument for high seller notes to owners, that it spreads out their income and gives them assured income for a number of years, which to a retiring owner can be attractive. It's a little counterintuitive, because you'd think, well, wouldn't you just rather have all the money at once? But there's a psychological aspect to this of knowing that the check is coming in the mail every 2 weeks or every month for 7 years.
Yep.
That is even if it's that's more appealing than getting it all right now. These are entrepreneurs. These are people who understand deferred gratification.
Yeah.
Unlike I think the normie would just want all the money up front. But these business owners maybe are more sophisticated. And there's tax benefits too.
Yep. Exactly.
Which is huge. So good reminder on that. Well, we're running out of time here, Abhi, but tell me quickly the progress you've made on these subsequent acquisitions and bolt-ons, and where your fief sits in terms of overall size. And then I just want to hear, the same about the entire Holdco. And then I want to hear about how it's going as an operator. So
Sure.
what other pool businesses have you bought since, and what does that portfolio look like now?
Yeah. So we've done 4 more add-ons since then, in the last 18 months, varying sizes, all the way from an enterprise value of like 100,000 to over $1 million, and added and assimilated and integrated all 4 of them. The latest acquisition was just a month ago, November 24, and we're now at a run rate where we've sort of almost tripled the company of where we started from. So let's call it roughly 8 to 9 million revenue range is where we are, and we've grown from 17 employees to 51 employees. Really expanded our geographical area, and definitely gone through the big J curve of the first year in terms of EBITDA. We're still maintaining that in the teens, and it is, the J curve was, I knew what to expect, but when you're in the middle of it, it is pretty strong. I think we are now emerging out of it. And I can see in the last couple of months, we are making strides and kind of coming out of that, which is great. So the next year is going to be more of like just getting a lot of systems and processes that is a combination of 5 different companies to be really one company. Now have a leadership team. I have 3 directors, 1 for sales, 1 for residential, 1 for commercial. I have a couple of quality managers, and really built out what was essentially just 1 service manager and me in the beginning to a team of 5 of us who sit on the leadership team on a weekly basis and kind of like talk about the company and metrics and whatnot. So I'm very, very excited about what we've kind of got this to be. My goal, and sort of the holding company goal, is we want to get each one of our businesses to about 10 million in revenue in the first 3 to 4 years. And why 10 million in revenue? And that's, again, sort of a throwaway number, but there's some science behind it. Roughly, the kind of businesses we tend to buy have 15, 20% EBITDA in there. So now at 10 million revenue, you're kind of talking $1.5 million to 2 million in EBITDA, with some loan servicing and whatnot taken out. That still leaves some substantial chunk of money for each one of us to hit our numbers that we talked about, and some to be able to reinvest. And it does, that's why in the pool service space, I knew I was buying smaller than what I would have wanted, but it was very clear I could quickly consolidate into a bigger company. And maybe in 12 months from now, I'm already hitting that 10 million mark of where we want it to be. So that's the sort of structure of where we've got operating company 1. Operating company 2 was an
Abhi, let me before we get to that, let me stop you there. Of course,
sure.
I want to hear that, but how long did it take you? You bought the first business in May of 23, did you say?
July of 23, and now we are in December of 24, so a little less than 18 months.
A little less than a year and a half. You took and that really was the platform business, because it was the biggest of the bunch, even though it was smaller than you wanted. It was the biggest of your 5 pool acquisitions.
Right.
You've gotten from 3 million to 8 or 9 million, and 10 million is within spitting distance. So that's your goal of 10 million, and you said 3 to 5 years seems all but assured. And so great for business number 1, but of course also really bodes well for this whole Holdco project, that the very first experiment is going so well. Just a little bit of a digression into the pool business. I don't consider the Bay Area a big pool town big pool area. Certainly San Francisco proper is not. Maybe in the East Bay, there where it's hotter, there are a lot of people with pools. Is it a pool region? And the reason I'm getting at this is because I just wonder how attractive pool service businesses might be in geographies that don't have pools everywhere, like in Arizona or Florida.
Yeah. In the pool services space, there's like the tier 1 markets, which is essentially the Sun Belt, so sort of Florida and Sun Belt, and then Arizona, Nevada, and SoCal kind of come in the tier 1. They have 12 months of pool season, phenomenal sun, you can use always. Tier 2 is what, and then tier 3 is sort of Boston, right? You kind of only have like a 3-4 month pool season. Tier 2 is midway. Northern California and the San Francisco Bay Area is sort of at the top of that tier 2, where you kind of get a pool season which is 7-8 months in a year, maybe even 8 months. And in particular parts like the East Bay, you said, you can get 10 months over there. It's kind of hot, and you can get some. We operate predominantly currently in the South Bay and the peninsula, so the Silicon Valley proper. So that's our core area where we operate in I think 21 of the top 100 richest zip codes in the country are over there. And so many of these are large houses, estates with pools. So there are a lot of pools. People do have quite a few of them. But as we probably in the future expand into the East Bay, I think the TAM is much bigger. But in terms of propensity to spend and people who care more about quality, that's probably like our core area where we are right now. So it's a pretty big, there's 120,000 pools in the 2 counties that we operate in. And we service about 1,500 of them.
Oh, that's amazing. And just in the 2 counties where you already are, you are at 1% penetration.
Yep.
Oh man, you could just feast there, growing organically and inorganically for another many years.
Yep.
That's phenomenal. Great. And then integration. So you started by saying, after we talked about the FedEx routes, that pool routes is another thing you see all over Biz Buy Sell. And many of those businesses are tiny and they're essentially client lists, which as a platform business, as a first business, are terrible options, but as add-ons can be amazing options. It would seem. What have you found?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm still not a fan of buying a pool route and just a customer list. I have tried it, have been marginally successful. I feel the bigger solve is to buy an established pool service company where where you get employees as well. Because part of the problem is getting customers, but part of the real problem is getting good employees who know the business, who are okay doing the hard work of being a pool guy. It's not easy. It's monotonous. It is physically taxing. You have to do it in all elements, and you have to do the same thing again and again. So it's a tough one. So to get good quality employees is a big thing. So I've focused my add-on filters on, are we getting customers in an area that we really like? Are we getting good employees along with it? Have the customers stayed for a long enough time that they've built some trust and equity with the pool guy or the company? Do the customers pay well? And finally, is there some pricing arbitrage where I can kind of like wow the customers with something different? Hey, maybe I can, we traditionally offer these services which you wouldn't get as part of your smaller company that you had. And now you're delighting the customer saying, oh, this company can take care of all my needs rather than me having to call somebody else. I want a new heater. My old company did not have a qualified heater electrician and a repair technician, but now you do. Now I don't have to pick up the phone and call. You will just fix it for me. That's kind of cool. That means now I have pricing power because I can then kind of really build that. So I look at these 5 filters of how when we do add-ons, and it wasn't that I knew these right off the bat. I've kind of refined it over time, having done multiple of them, seeing what mistakes we made. Integration is always a pain. It's a muscle that you can keep building, but you will never perfect. There's always challenges that come along with it. There's mistakes we make, but we've gotten better and better at it. More so, you become pretty thick-skinned about what to expect and all kind of challenges and curveballs that get thrown at you. You kind of get at it. But I do spend probably a lot of my time personally of what I spend on integration and process and team building than anything else.
And since we're on the topic of that, the integration, the team building, the processes, how are you finding that part of your life? This is your now day to day. This is the operations of being a small business owner. How does it compare to high growth startup or being a consultant?
Very different, but I love it. It is. I get a lot of joy seeing what I'm building. It's sort of similar. At the core of it, at the end of it all, as a leader, what you're doing is you're just building teams and trying to get out of the way so that they can achieve great things. And you might do it in different settings with different caliber of people. And I like that it feels different enough, but similar enough where I can bring to bear what I have done in the past. And it shows results, and you can kind of see it right off the bat. And if you make mistakes, your team will drag you over the coal and make fun of you for it, and that's cool by me. So has happened.
That's your thick skin talking.
That's right. But that's the fun part of building it, because then you're truly building it with that long-term model and mental model, and that gives you the courage to do it. Like if I was a searcher and I had raised capital and I am watching my growth rate and my EBITDA like a hawk every month, I would have made very different decisions in many ways to what I have done now. And maybe a couple of these acquisitions would not have happened. But I'm focused on like, hey, how do we get a good enough large consolidated base where now that I have a leadership team, I can now build the right models for this leadership team to run this business, and I can kind of like get out of the way of doing it. And it doesn't have to be that I'll just keep buying pool companies. It doesn't have to be that, now that we've gotten to that spitting distance of 10 mil, maybe we just focus on organic, and that's cheaper. And we are good at it. And in the last 1 year, we grew organically more than 3 out of the 4 add-on acquisitions we did. Like we had built a company organically, which was bigger in size than any 3 or 4 of them. And if that engine kind of holds over time, then it really kind of compounds. And that's what I'm excited about.
And to be clear, Abhi, what you said is if you had been like a self-funded searcher, SBA style, took investor money, you wouldn't have made the decisions you did because you feel, because of your long-term horizon here, you just have the room and the space to take your time. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, I know. I've seen people on Twitter kind of talk about like, hey, I'm trying to grow out and I'm trying to hire another operations manager or so, but I can't make that investment, right? Yeah. And why can't they make that investment? Because I don't know the numbers, but it could be a reason where just the numbers just don't pencil itself. But it also could mean that, hey, they're at this where they have to make certain distributions to investors. And they cannot afford to hire another 100K ops man, 80K, 100K ops manager in place for them to get out of the way so that they can focus on growing the business and marketing. we had a similar problem come sort of January, February of this year. We had done 2 add-on acquisitions by then. And suddenly I felt it was becoming too much for my service manager at that point of time to run it. And I went to my partners and said, hey, we just need to hire another ops manager. And we kind of, they were like, oh, how much will it cost? Yeah, I don't know, 80, 100K. And I'm like, what? Already? Like, we just bought the business. And I'm like, yeah, but that's what we need. And they were like, in 2 minutes, they were like, yeah, okay, done. You're closer to it. You know what is needed. Just get it done, right? And that means our J curve was steeper for a few months. But we came out way stronger because of that. The guy has been a great hire and gets a lot of positive reviews. It's made even the first manager I had even more effective because of that. And now we just bought another company. So now we don't, we already have that infrastructure kind of set up. So you're investing ahead of growth, and you can afford to make that investments when you have a longer term picture in mind, and you have a very understanding set of partners.
Fantastic, Abhi. Okay, close this out now, please, with the other acquisitions done at the Holdco level.
Yeah, so we did one more acquisition at the Holdco level, where one of my partners ended up moving to Seattle. So he started looking for businesses in Seattle. He found one pretty immediately that he liked and kind of penciled in with all of our criteria. And we ended up buying an existing franchise that had, a franchisee had kind of built it over 10 years. It does kitchen cabinet shelving solutions. So pull-out drawers, lazy Susans, design and installation. Excellent quality product, good franchise, and very good team. What the seller had built over 10 years had dialed it in immensely well. Compared to sort of the pool space where everything is very paper oriented, and I had to take the whole journey of digitization and whatnot. This one was all dialed in. You just didn't need anything. You just need to focus on sales and marketing, get more leads in, and run the business and not tank it. I think that was the appeal of it. So he's now running it part-time while still working in his company, and he expects to probably in the next 12 months will be most likely joining full-time as well to further grow that business. So that's the second one we've done.
And how big a business is that, Abhi?
Ballpark 4 to 5 million in revenue.
Okay. So to achieve your $10 million per business goal, he's got a little more than double that business.
Yeah. And there, our thesis was that franchisor has branched off into closets, and closet design and installation is a 8x, 9x more TAM than kitchens and kitchen shelving solutions. So our goal was and we've talked to quite a few franchisees who've been doing that, and our goal is, when Rajit kind of comes in full time, he focuses on that build out. So it's more geography expansion and adding a new business line is the real source of growth there, rather than inorganic.
Rather than inorganic?
Yeah, rather than inorganic, because it's a very local
franchise
business
concept. We think of inorganic as particularly appealing, where you can do the programmatic acquisition. There's no integration, or I shouldn't say, of course, there's always some integration, but there's a lot less integration, which is the pain point you've been experiencing in non-franchise land. Why does that not appeal to you to roll up some shelf genies in and around Western Washington?
2 reasons. One, we happen to be the number one franchisee in the Shelf Genie system. So we already have almost every conceivable territory in and around Seattle, Tacoma region. So there's not much left around there. It has to be a plane hop away. So we either start Shelf Genie in Portland, or actually the San Francisco Bay Area does not, which, maybe could change soon, or really do it in a different place, or buy inorganically an existing franchise out in a different place. Possible. That's not our primary target right now, because we feel like, just expanding a new business line is much larger creation of value. And all four of us, we're just not particularly enthusiastic about managing a remote business, sitting in Seattle and managing a business in Salt Lake City, for example. It gives us all a little bit of heartburn of whether we'll be able to do that successfully. Maybe that could change, but right now that's the plan.
And were there any more, or is it Shelf Genie in Seattle?
Yeah, that's the one. Those are the two that we have now. There's an active hunt on for number 3 for Raj, who's involved with pools, etc. as well, and we are looking to find something for him next year in the Bay Area. So we are actively scouting and looking for something.
Does the Holdco have a name?
Yes.
Is it a portmanteau of the four of your first name sort of thing?
When this episode airs, we will have a new name.
Okay.
So we will be called Truss One Partners. Truss as in TRUSS, like the building trusses that kind of holds up a building. So we were formerly known as Route One Capital, but we are changing our name, and we will be Truss One Partners by the time this airs.
And is that because Route One, now that you're in Seattle, no longer holds?
It's a good story. I should use that from now on. It's actually not. We ended up getting into some trademark issue.
Wow.
One of our guiding strengths has been speed. I'm always about let's just make progress over just being perfect. There are some people who are much better at being perfect and being diligent. We never looked into, does anybody have this trademark, and does in this space? We were like a bunch of guys who were like, all right, let's go buy a business. Here's a sim. Let's write together this thing on Starbucks napkin, and let's just get started. We found the name Route One. We just proposed it. We liked it. We went with it. And we've been asked to change. And after much consideration, we are like, hey, we are too early in the game. If you're going to build something big, it's okay. We can change it. We don't have a lot of capital invested in it. So we can. So we're going to be rebranding as Truss One Partners.
Well, and the good thing about a Holdco is, of course, a Holdco, as it gets more mature and more visibility, the name does matter, but it's not a consumer-facing brand, so you have a lot of room to change it, and not a lot of investment in the brand itself.
Correct.
But I will say I like Truss One. It has more originality too than Route One. I think.
Right.
Route One. Yeah. What didn't I ask you, Abhi? Anything you want to say that we didn't get a chance to talk about?
No, I think the big piece, as I reflect back on this journey of now 18 months into it, I think what I take a lot of pride in is it's very easy to judge it in different ways, right? You can judge it as like, hey, are you having fun? Are you making enough money? Are you getting enough time with your family that you wanted? Whatever. And I think having those measuring yardsticks up front is very, very important. I was very clear what matters to me. I wanted to build a career around my life and not the other way around. We are all used to building lives around our careers. And I was like, okay, I'm at a point where I want to switch that. And I want to really build a career around my life. And if that requires me to do things differently, so be it. But here's how I'm going to measure it, right? And for me, now when I measure against that, I hit 2.5 out of the 3 things that I want. And I have line of sight to get from 2.5 to 3.
And what are your KPIs? Like hours with your daughter sort of thing?
Yeah, without getting too precise, I think it's time with my family, time for myself to pursue my hobbies and my health and whatnot. And third is make some amount of money that I want to be able to make and have line of sight to. And I think I've hit the first two. And the third one, I was never going to start off getting that amount of money in the first 12 months. But now I think I have a pretty strong line of sight to get there. So that's how this holiday season, when I reflect, I feel pretty good. I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm hitting those three of my personal whys. And sometimes as searchers, as entrepreneurs, as CEOs, you kind of get lost in I'm measuring it based on the EBITDA of my company, the growth rate of my company, but you forget why you're doing this in the first place. And I think that's a key lesson for a lot of people.
Well, that's a great reminder, Abhi. I'm as guilty of that as anybody. One of the first questions I'm always trying to get at with my guests is, what EBITDA is and what aggregate revenue is. So I take the point. Great walk through your Holdco structure and your first and I guess second acquisitions here. Really an interesting group model here. And I have to believe, it makes so much sense. I have to believe as I publish stories like this, there will be more of it. You actually had reached out to me, Abhi, because in reaction to Mark Zojibwami, who up in Calgary is doing a similar model. The three of them sequentially buying businesses into a Holdco. And you said to me, how funny they kind of arrived at a very, very similar model to the one that we kind of originated here on a Starbucks napkin. So there's something to it. It two is not quite a trend, but we're getting there. And again, it seems like you get all of the same financial benefit, plus you get flexibility, less mental burden, more eyes on each other's businesses, not going it alone, which is one of the classic complaints and weaknesses of being an entrepreneur, is the loneliness. So you've solved for all of that. So it's pretty neat stuff, Abhi. If people want to reach out, do you have a way that you like them to do that? You on LinkedIn, email? What do you prefer?
Yeah, LinkedIn or X. Probably LinkedIn. You can find me, Abhi Ravishankar, on X. At Abhilash. Abhilash is my full first name, Abhilash, and those are two good places.
Fantastic. Abhi Ravishankar, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you, Will. It's a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you subscribe to the Acquiring Minds channel below. We are now publishing twice a week. So tons of new interviews and stories to come, stories that will help you along your own path to acquiring a business.